23 teams going camping today, including the Bills, whose veterans are reporting in Rochester. Josh Allen, of course, will be there. He'll be without the familiar face of Stephon Diggs, who is already in camp himself with Houston after he was traded in April. Diggs, not the only piece gone from this team that's won the division the past 3 years. Key players on the defense no longer there. Tre'Davious White, Leonard Floyd, Jordan Poyer, all gone. Now, the Bills have run this division since Tom Brady left town. Since Brady departed, the Bills have won the AFC East 4 straight years. They are still the favorites at ESPN Bet to win again in 2024, but just ever so slightly over the Jets, who have not won the division, by the way, since 2002. And I want to go back to something we touched on very briefly early. And RC, I'll start with you, and then I want to find out from my insiders here whether or not there's anything that can be done about it. Josh Allen is an extraordinary player. But right now, they're counting a lot on a rookie receiver coming in Keon Coleman and some other players who don't have the highest pedigree and all the rest of that. Do you believe Josh Allen has enough around him on that offense to contend with the other big teams in the AFC?
Not really, and not at this point. But
right.
also that depends on offensive coordinator Joe Brady. Think about what the run game looked like once he took over last year for Ken Dorsey and being able to get James Cook going. And now also those two really talented tight ends you have there in Knox and also Dalton Kincaid. I think this can be a different team. It doesn't have to be this explosive team that pushes the football down the football on a consistent basis. It can be a team that runs the ball, gets into the play action, uses their quarterback's extraordinary athleticism both inside and outside the pocket to create big plays. I think this is a team that comes along throughout the end of the season. My problem is this. When you think about how explosive teams like the Kansas City Chiefs have now gotten, we know what the Baltimore Ravens are from an offensive standpoint. And these are the sort of teams you'll be competing with in order to win a championship. It just seems they have to have more in the skill player room.
Absolutely. And they're also asking more of Josh Allen, a player that we keep saying needs to do less, right? All the critics keep saying he needs to do less, and now they're asking him to do more. So I keep coming back to, and I give Tannenbaum credit, Mike T brought this up months ago, the name Brandon Aiyuk. And so I come to you, Jeff Darlington. Aiyuk has requested a trade. What are you here? Do you think there's any sense that San Francisco ultimately honors that?
No, I don't. I don't see a world where San Francisco sends him off, especially at this point when they're entering into a year when they believe they have a championship caliber roster. I know that sounds like maybe a point you'd make if you're the team when it comes to negotiating and leverage with the wide receiver or a team that might be interested in him. But quite frankly, it really doesn't make any sense for the team at this point to ship off Brandon Aiyuk. We'll see how that unfolds. Should Aiyuk hold out of training camp for an extended period or at all? But right now, there is no sense that the Bills could acquire Aiyuk to bolster that room.
That's right. If I'm San Francisco, I don't want to trade him either for exactly that reason. So you tell me, Mike, from having sat in that seat, what would have to happen for, forgetting whether it's Buffalo or anybody else, for this Aiyuk thing to become real?
Yeah, I think what's most instructive of what we saw Jalen Ramsey do when he was with the Jacksonville Jaguars that led to that big trade with the Rams, which is we don't have holdouts anymore, Green. We have hold-ins, meaning Brandon Aiyuk shows up every day and he doesn't practice. And I know RC spoke to Brandon Aiyuk on his podcast, The Pivot, and that's really going to be the determining factor here, which is, does he have, the stubbornness really to sit there every day and not practice? It's really hard to do. At some point, your teammates you're sitting there. We have a chance to win a championship in a very meaningful way. They're going to want you to play. And can he sit there day in and day out and force John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan's hand? So right now, we don't know. But I will say this. If I'm Brandon being the GM of the Bills and there's any glimpse of any hope, I don't get off the phone. I simply pay the bill for Brandon Aiyuk. And I think the 49ers just have to try to really be more patient than whatever Brandon Aiyuk's stubbornness is.
Quick final word, RC, go.
Hey, if I'm the San Francisco 49ers, he's there, and I'm going to force him to play. You got to think about Brandon Aiyuk being a guy who's never seen $14 million. And so do you believe that if he's in San Francisco, he's going to pass up on that opportunity? He's going to try to force himself out or force his way out of there with a bad back or a bad hamstring. He also has to continue to show the rest of the world that he is a receiver that should receive over $30 million a year. And so if I'm the San Francisco 49ers and I'm John Lynch and I'm Kyle Shanahan, I stay strong, I make him come to camp, and eventually I just expect that his competitiveness, that his want to show everybody that he does deserve that big contract forces him on the field. And when he's on the field, there's very few better at beating big-time one-on-one coverage.
Jeff?
I generally agree with all this. I said it myself, but to play devil's advocate, we are talking about $14 million this year. We're talking about doubling that in his next contract. So that's where his mindset is. This is not off by a few $1 million. This is, I step on the field right now as a $14 million a year player, or perhaps 28 or higher $1 million a year player. Big difference.
On the day 23 NFL teams report to training camp, let's pay fill in the blank with teams from the NFC East. Hey, Ryan Clark, the Cowboys should prioritize whom when it comes to getting their contract signed?
They should prioritize CeeDee Lamb. I don't think it's going to be possible to get Dak's deal done right now unless you give him $60+ million a year. But CeeDee Lamb showed you last year that he's one of the best football players in all of the NFL and definitely tops at the position along with guys like Justin Jefferson. And so CeeDee Lamb should get his money now because you know you have to pay Micah Parsons on the back end next offseason.
Cowboys report tomorrow. We'll see if he's among them. Jeff, Darlington, Daniel Jones and the Giants will finish where in the NFC East?
Last? I mean, I say this with all due respect. It probably doesn't come across that way, but I still feel like without Saquon Barkley, we know more about Daniel Jones right now than we do say about Jaden Daniels in Washington, where I think that the mystery brings more optimism than the knowledge of what the Giants have right now. So I think they're in a prove-it mode. Maybe they don't finish last, but for me right now, for filling in the blank, I got to go last.
Yes, no, I love the respectfully part of that. I'm with RC. And Mike T, fill in this blank for me here. Saquon Barkley makes the Eagles what?
Much more explosive, and if I had a second blank, really hard to defend. Last year, when their offense regressed, Hemo gave me a great stat, they went from 7th to 19th in explosive running plays. So he's going to bring an element that's going to make this offense so hard to defend, because when he gets the ball, he has the ability to make those 10-yard runs or more, something they couldn't do a year ago. That's going to open up a lot on the outside for both A.J. Brown and DeVonta
Smith, yeah. And so, Saquon Barkley, you can hear new sound from him this morning. He sat down with our old friend Diana Rossini on the Scoop City podcast. And here is Saquon sounding very optimistic on his new team in Philly.
I think A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, can you name a better wide receiver duo in the NFL? I don't think it's close. I think Dallas is one of the best tight ends. We got one of the best offensive line. We have one of the best quarterbacks. I believe I'm one of the best running backs in the NFL. We have all the talent, but it doesn't matter. If it looks good on paper, it doesn't matter.
Here's the thing. It does matter. They have a lot of really good football players on that offense. And our buddy Chris Canty the other day, RC, I think you were here with me when he said it, where he said it on Sportsmanlike on ESPN radio, but we played the sound over here. He's putting a lot of pressure, I think voicing the fact that there was a lot of pressure on Nick Sirianni to get this right after it all went so wrong last season. How would you describe the pressure that exists on that coach, RC, as this season begins?
I think it's pressure because we always think that Howie Roseman is doing the right things when it comes to acquiring football players. And the other pressure that's on Nick Sirianni is that he's a victim of his own success. He's a victim of bringing this team to a Super Bowl. He's a victim of having a guy like Jalen Hurts be a top 3 finisher in the MVP candidacy. And so when you think about all of those things, you can't have a drop-off or a fall-off like we saw last year. But this team was bad everywhere, and that's why it falls on Nick Sirianni. This team was bad offensively under Brian Johnson. It was bad under both defensive coordinators, where there was lackluster effort and lackluster tackling on the defensive side of the football. So there's so much that needs to be fixed. I feel like they put the players on the field and on the roster to do that. And so now the pressure's on Nick Sirianni not to just be a good team, but to be the team he already coached 2 years ago that was one score away from beating the Kansas City Chiefs for the big game.
Absolutely. Is he on the hottest seat in the NFL?
Robert Saleh is right down the road. I mean, we keep talking about the Jets.
Okay,
right?
Fair enough. Is Nick Sirianni's seat also
Said fair enough.
It's temperately warm, I would say. Look, they have a ton of talent. RC just went through it. But look, they were in the Super Bowl, and they, as RC said, literally plays away Green from winning a championship. There's a lot of owners that would say, hey, I'll take that guy as my head coach. So there are massive expectations. They have a really good team. I do think that will be a little bumpy with 2 new coordinators. I don't think we understand, like, there is some growing pains. But at the end of the season, it's hard for us to think that the Eagles won't be there meaningfully in the NFC. So there may be some pressure, but I do think they're just way too talented not to respond.
But, Jeff, what is the sense? Because they didn't just play badly down the stretch last year. RC kind of touched on it. They almost seemed like they kind of folded. So there was something clearly beneath the surface of what was going on, and that's the part of it I think people will be watching closely.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that this is really about Nick Sirianni trying to get the most out of Jalen Hurts as a leader as well as a player, and I think that's certainly the number one storyline going into this season. But when we talk about the pressure on Nick Sirianni, I know Sirianni pretty well enough to say that whether this is for good or for bad, I don't think that he feels the pressure in a bad way. I really believe that Sirianni is like, if you don't like the job I'm doing, then fire me. And I know, again, he's an emotional guy. We've all seen that on a number of different times. How that unfolds and plays out for the Eagles with that type of mentality, we'll see. Put the pressure on him. I really don't think it's going to affect his performance as a coach.
That's fair, and it shouldn't. But at the end of the day, RC, I mean, I'll just go through the names again. They have Jalen Hurts, they have Devontae Smith, they have A.J. Brown, they have Saquon Barkley. I know they've lost some pieces on that offensive line, but it still figures to be good. If that offense isn't good, really good, then someone is going to have to answer for that.
No, absolutely. And that's what I was talking about building a roster. They've built a roster that's supposed to score points. They've built a roster that should be able to stop people. If you're Nick Sirianni and you're Howie Roseman, you're looking at this team and you expect to win the NFC East. And not only win the NFC East, but to be in competition with the Detroit Lions, the San Francisco 49ers, the Green Bay Packers, to win the entire NFC. And if they start to fold early, if they meet some adversity, I want to see what that relationship between Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni is. If you look at early last season when this team was winning, Jalen Hurts saw that there were some things that needed to be fixed or they could fold the way they did.